Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm here today with the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schultz, to talk about an important step Alberta is taking to protect our province's economy and help our businesses stay competitive. The current tariffs being imposed by the United States are increasing costs, disrupting supply chains and creating uncertainty for industry, making it challenging to operate efficiently and stay globally competitive. Our government is committed to supporting Alberta businesses and industry and doing everything we can to ensure they remain competitive across global markets. And we will continue to take action to make Alberta one of the most business-friendly jurisdictions in North America by removing burdensome red tape, eliminating unnecessary regulations, and keeping taxes low. Our industry, from energy to agriculture, not only empower our economy, but the wealth that they generate allows us to provide Albertans with the essential services they rely on, from healthcare to education. That's why it's so important that we listen to industry concerns and help develop a business environment where they can thrive. And what we have heard from industry is that any further increases to the industrial carbon tax past $100 per tonne would be detrimental to their businesses and would diminish their competitiveness in the market. That's why today we're announcing that effective immediately, Alberta is freezing the industrial carbon tax under Alberta's Technology and Innovation Emissions Reduction System, or TIER, at $95 per tonne of emissions. This price was set to increase to $110 per tonne next year and continue increasing to $170 per tonne by 2030. Now, let me be clear, Alberta remains committed to reducing emissions through the development and implementation of new technologies, not unrealistically high taxes, while responsibly powering the world for decades to come. Alberta's industrial carbon tax system, TIER, has been in place since 2007. Our approach has reduced emissions in intensity by over 22% and reduced overall emissions by an estimated 7.2%, while production increased by 90%. We have a reasonable system in place that's working, but any additional increases past $100 per tonne will wipe out any of the benefits we've seen. That means fewer jobs for Albertans, less revenue to invest in our public services, and decreased innovation across our industries. But instead of supporting our industry, Ottawa wants to increase their industrial carbon tax to $170 per tonne by 2030. Now, if industry told us that any increase past $100 per tonne would be harmful, you can imagine what a $170 tonne industrial carbon tax would do to our industry. That would be devastating to Alberta's economy. This is yet another example of Ottawa overstepping into our provincial jurisdiction with reckless policies that damage our industry. This is on top of the anti-industry and anti-development policies passed by Liberal and NDP politicians in Ottawa to cap production, landlock Alberta's resources, destroy our reliable and affordable electricity grid, and ultimately to put Albertans out of work and ruin our economy. With the change in government south of the border, it is essential that we have a reasonable carbon pricing system, not one that will price our industries out of global markets. By freezing Alberta's industrial carbon price, we are acting in the best interest of all Albertans. We are providing certainty, stability, and economic relief to the businesses that contribute so much to all of Canada. And we are supporting the energy producers whose expertise and innovation are quite literally shaping the world's energy future. But this freeze doesn't just benefit our energy industry. It's also agriculture, forestry, petrochemicals, and other industries that make the products the world needs, that contribute so much to our economy and create jobs that enable hardworking Albertans to provide for their families. We will stand up for our province, support our industries, and protect Albertans' livelihoods. But make no mistake, our government will always do what is right for Alberta, no matter what Ottawa says. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Minister Rebecca Schultz to provide more details.
Thank you very much, Premier. The world wants our energy and resources. Energy demand is soaring, and countries around the world are seeking the petrochemicals, minerals, timber, and other products that we produce every single day. But for the past 10 years, our province has faced a tidal wave of anti-energy, anti-agriculture, and anti-resource policies from the federal government. They've added costs, increased delays, and effectively hung a closed for business sign on Canada's door, whether for LNG, oil and natural gas, or the many other resources resources that we are blessed with. For years, this environmental agenda from Ottawa was telling Canadians and Albertans that if they just paid more in taxes and punitive regulations, the trade-off would be that we're reducing global emissions and helping the environment. Somehow, we would be better off as a Canadian economy. Instead, this federal platform delivered a stalled economy and increased costs for everyday Canadians. And Canadians have started to ask why. While the entirety of our country contributes just 1.5% of global emissions, and yet it wasn't too long ago when we were paying over 34% of the entire world's carbon taxes because of this approach, the largest share of any country. As Premier has mentioned many times, it has been a litany of anti-development policy that's only made us a less attractive place to invest and sent that capital elsewhere. It's been a long time for Canada to focus on a common sense approach, like we've done through our tier system here in Alberta. Of course, the tariffs imposed by the potential tariffs imposed by the United States are making it even harder for Alberta industries to compete and expand. Costs are rising, materials are harder to get, and more expensive when they arrive. Supply chains, of course, are less predictable, and we are already seeing the impacts. Companies are delaying hiring, pausing investment, or pushing major capital spending into the future. During tough times, competitiveness is the difference maker. Our industries, whether they drill, mine, manufacture, process, or build, are among the best and most productive in the world. So we cannot risk falling behind, and we cannot continue to put jobs and our economy at risk with the uncertainty of U.S. tariffs coupled with ideological policy. Over the past months, we have been engaging with industry on the future of our tier program. We know that regulation is up in 2026, and we wanted to hear how industry felt about what's working well and what presents a challenge. Certainly, concerns were raised about the impacts of a carbon price reaching over $100 per ton. That is why, effective immediately, we're freezing the industrial carbon price. This will provide a stable, predictable, and effective environment for companies to operate and remain competitive. It will also benefit sectors across the economy, including agriculture, forestry, and manufacturing, helping reduce costs, grow industries, and of course, keep Albertans working. We're keeping Alberta competitive, standing up for our workers, our industries, and our economy. We are absolutely a leader when it comes to energy and resource development, but also when it comes to emissions reduction. This is our jurisdiction, not Ottawa's. And if the federal government wants to work together to keep our economy strong, respect the Constitution, and do the right thing for the environment, they can follow the path forward that has been outlined by the Premier over the last couple of weeks. Thank you, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Awesome.
Sure.
We'll start off here with questions from the floor. Of course, one question, one follow-up before making our way to the phones, and I'll see a show of hands from the room. We'll start off with Janet, then go to Shay.
A question for the Premier. So previously you'd said that you couldn't comment or presuppose any potential referendum question put to the populace. The Alberta Prosperity Project this morning released the question that they intend to move forward with, which is, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? They said they're waiting until they can get about 600,000 signatures before pushing forward with the petition. So if any referendum question has to respect the treaties, would you be willing to put that question on a ballot to Albertans?
Well, as I mentioned, there is a citizen-initiated process. Having people sign up on a website saying that they will ultimately sign a petition is one thing. Getting the physical signatures signed up is another. That's why we have to wait for the process to play out. We haven't yet passed the legislation, and so once the legislation passes, it'll be pretty clear what the timeframes are. I know that there are several groups out there that are proposing different timelines, different questions, and so I'll wait to see which one garners enough signatures and actually gets a petition campaign going before I would comment on that. But I've made my position clear. I support a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, and it's my job to see if we can get a new deal with Ottawa so that I can convince more Albertans to feel the same.
But whose job is it to determine whether or not a question being put to Albertans is constitutional or respects the Charter? Is it the government's job to say, we don't think that's a legal question? Is it Elections Alberta's job?
Well, I think it was the Supreme Court's job, and so the Supreme Court in their Clarity Act gave some pretty clear ideas about what you needed to do. which prompts a negotiation if something like that was ever to be successful. So I think that this, the Clarity Act and the constitutional or the court discussion around it gives a pretty clear path. That wasn't just to apply to one province. So I think that it's no one's asking these questions in Quebec, even though they do have the Parti Québécois polling higher than anyone else, and they've just elected 24 separatist MPs. So I think that perhaps maybe talking to some of the scholars in Quebec, because they've obviously worked through that, and they're much further ahead in the discussion than any other region.
Awesome. And we'll go to Shay, and then Jack, if you still have your hand up, we'll go to you next. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking my question. It's for the Premier. We've heard, you talked earlier today about economic stability and relief. I've heard from some economists who say that any plan for Alberta to separate from Canada is not economically viable, and they fear that investment would flee from this province as a result of that instability. I know you said that your government is not putting forward this referendum yourself, but you are leaving the door open. So are you risking economic stability by doing so?
Well, as I said, we support citizen-initiated referenda. The whole purpose is to have a process for citizens to be able to put those questions forward. I would say that would be a question for any of the groups that are leading that, because we aren't. We're leading the effort to have a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada, and that will be what I would be advocating for.
But by lowering the threshold, you're leaving the door open, and you yourself acknowledged, talking with Vashi Capellas last week, that you needed to provide an outlet, or else it could create a new party. So, therefore, I guess, are you worried about fractures within your own party as a result of this? We're seeing new groups, whether it's the Alberta Prosperity or the Republicans, saying that they're hearing a lot of support on this.
I think single issues should be put on a single question on a ballot if citizens want it to be. Our political party has dozens, if not hundreds, of policies. And so I don't intend for the United Conservative Party to become a single issue party. We intend to continue to support their founding documents, which that we are supporting constitutional sovereignty within United Canada. So once again, I think that those questions are for the various groups that are putting forward the referendum questions.
Thanks. And we'll go to Jack, then we'll take a couple from the phones before coming back to the room.
Jack Brown with the Canadian Press. How long is the freeze going to be in place for?
For now, it's indefinite. The point is that when we went out to talk to industry, the carbon tax, of course, industry is feeling the pinch right now. We are in an agreement with the federal government to ensure that we can continue to manage this on behalf of Alberta industry. But the price going above $100 does make us wildly uncompetitive, which is not a common sense approach at a time like this, where the threats from outside our borders are so great, and the world is looking for Canadian energy right now for energy security, energy affordability, and of course to meet their environmental goals. So right now we are implementing this freeze indefinitely. It will likely, as Premier said in her speaking notes, spark a conversation with the federal government. We're hoping that just as we heard a message about economic growth and nation building throughout the campaign, that this Liberal government is going to take a different approach when it comes to energy production and emissions policy.
And then as a follow-up to that, like, if I'm not mistaken, like the escalating price was the point of carbon tax schemes, right? Like you're supposed to, with the escalating price, you incentivize businesses to invest in their own emissions reduction. Freezing the price kind of seems contrary to that, but it also kind of actually, in my head, breeds instability, because an indefinite freeze is something that will change, and they knew, the businesses knew when the price was escalating. So how is that stable?
I would say that the fact that the first action that Prime Minister Mark Carney took was to eliminate the retail carbon tax shows you that price had gotten too high to bear. And I think that it's reasonable to expect that it's a parallel in the business community, that the price has gotten too high to bear. If you have a time frame of going out to 2050, there's no reason to try to front end load everything by 2030. That's been foundational to the dispute we're having with the federal government. Is let's coordinate around a 2050 target so that you can have a reasonable time frame to implement technology, develop new solutions, see the retirement of equipment. That's foundationally why we're having the dispute with Ottawa. The 170, could it have been possible if the Americans were following suit? I don't know. But you may have noticed there's a change of direction in the United States since November, which has caused a massive recalibration of everything in Canada. And if we want to be able to compete and integrate with our largest consumer, then we've got to have a reasonable level of increase. So as you've seen, we're not proposing it goes to zero. we're just proposing that it stays where it is, well, we have some kind of recalibration about how this is going to impact the business community. What we have heard from the business community is that it's too high. And I think if you look at Quebec's carbon price, Quebec's carbon trading price is lower than this. And so that is also one of the reasons why we're frustrated with the federal approach, is that it doesn't apply equally to all of the provinces. That was absolutely true on the retail tax, and it's certainly true on the industrial pricing as well. So this, I hope, will prompt a conversation for us to get in sync with the federal government. That's what we've been asking to do ever since I talked to Mark Carney's predecessor, and I mentioned this in our first conversation. And it may be, as you go forward, that there's a tolerance to increase it, but I can tell you, I think that the business community has reached its limit. And why does it matter? We're competing for capital with the United States. Those dollars can flow anywhere. And if we get too far ahead of where the Americans are, then all of those billions of dollars of investment will not come here, and that will impact our economy.
So thanks, Jack. We're going to take a few questions from the phones now. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Chris Varco with Calgary Herald.
Hi, these are questions for the Premier. Premier, what would you say to companies like Dow or Air Products or Shell that have made and announced investments into decarbonization projects in this province based on the carbon price going up to $170, a carbon price that your government agreed to back in November of 2022?
Well, we will talk with them. I mean, what I've been noticing is that the prices being signed on contracts for differences is $86.50, and so that was one of our considerations, is that that's kind of the guaranteed price that businesses were anticipating, and so we feel like by being above that, we've got a little bit of a give on that. But I'll turn it over to the minister to see if she has anything more to say.
Yeah, that's a great question. And just last week, I met with a number of folks, including Dow, Nova Chemicals, and others, and signaled that this is the direction we were moving in, given it is a very different time that we're in right now than we were back in 22, both in terms of what the federal government was campaigning on at that time. It was a far more activist agenda. We just came out of a federal election where the Prime Minister was campaigning on protecting the Canadian economy and building nation-building projects. So that is different. The other is the threats, of course, and uncertainty that we're seeing south of the border. And so those industries understood the decision we were making. Again, recognizing, I think, that it's unfair to artificially increase a carbon tax to benefit a small amount of projects and then leave the entire rest of industry in a position where they're uncompetitive. That is what freezes out investment, as the Premier said. They understood and did not oppose the direction that we were moving in. And we have been very frank with industry over the last number of months just to address the competitiveness and certainty piece. We didn't want industry facing additional uncertainty at the provincial level. So we've been very transparent about the options we're looking at, the feedback that we've been getting on tier, including freezing this price. It was specifically based on the feedback that industry provided to us.
Mm-hmm. And Premier, just to follow up on that, what will this do to the province's plans to reach carbon neutrality by 2050? What does this do for your own emissions targets?
Well, I hope that it is supportive of it, because that's what we've always said, is that we believe that the price is only one aspect, but the innovation is another aspect. And Minister Schultz has done a tremendous job of supporting a wide variety of projects through Emissions Reduction Alberta that has seeded a number of amazing innovations, including geothermal, doing analysis of small modular nuclear. We've got a direct air capture facility doing pilot projects in central Alberta. She could probably go on and mention many more. So those are the kind of things that I think are going to get to success for us. It also gives us the time frame to 2050 to kickstart the Pathways project with the new government. And if we can get decarbonized bitumen, I think that also sends a message to the world about our commitment to that. There's three aspects to that. One is, of course, the carbon capture component. The other part is the deployment of small modular reactors, which is probably 10 years out. And then the third kind of last mile approach is having direct air capture that would allow for us to be able to get whatever emissions cannot be abated or captured at source. So those all take time. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic. I mean, I always look back at what was the technology 25 years ago. I think we were still using. I don't think rotary phones had completely been phased out at that point, and look where we are today. So if you give industry enough of a time frame so that they can continue to invest in those step up or stage step improvements, then I think that we have every reason to believe that 2050 is achievable. It also allows us to help deploy some of our technology. Remember, another part of our strategy has been to have an export of LNG so that we can displace higher emitting fuels internationally. There's been lots of stories that have been done on this. I think if we displace 20% of the coal fleet in China with LNG, that's the equivalent of what our emissions are for Canada as a whole on an annual basis. So using those Article 6 provisions are really important to us as well. It's a holistic approach, and I think it's still achievable, but we have to be working with the federal government on having reasonable timeframes as well as reasonable prices. Otherwise, you'll end up killing the industry that is going to be able to achieve these investments. Did you have more you wanted to add on that?
Well, I think, Premier, you got it exactly right. And Premier was just in Japan. I was in Japan at the beginning of February. And, you know, when we are working with other nations around the world to deliver our safe, affordable, responsibly produced energy, the question is, how does your country have such a nonsensical approach to policy? Your natural gas will help us as energy consumers reach our emissions goals. So why would you be capping production and putting such high taxes on your producers? It doesn't make any sense. In fact, I think the question was, we know Alberta and BC have lots of natural gas. We know that we want it, but where is Canada? What can you do there? This doesn't make any sense. And so it would be nonsensical, as Premier said, to take an approach where we're shutting down industry instead of allowing our industry to displace emissions elsewhere around the world.
Perfect, thanks. And we'll go to our next caller. Operator, could you put them through, please?
Kevin Orland with Bloomberg News.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. Following on Pathways, have you spoken to them when you were formulating this freeze, or is this something that they were pushing for? I mean, that's a project that obviously is more financially viable the higher the carbon price goes, and was actually seeking guarantees of certain levels of carbon prices from the federal government. So I'm just curious how you see this move affecting that project, which you just mentioned.
Well, I think a lot of the Pathways project is going to require a commitment from the federal government to continue to support them in the way that they had intended to under the previous government. They were going to have 50% of the capital costs covered, contract for differences. We've come forward with our 12% refundable tax credit upon completion. And we're looking at ways that we can use our tier approach to be supportive of their goals. We still, some of the feedback that we got from them is what's shaping this policy today as well. So we know that tier is going to be an important part of their overall economics on that package. But I would say that the strong indicator that I got was that $95 was probably the limit. Did you want to comment?
Sure. I reached out to Pathways as well as individual companies last week, and I can tell you overwhelmingly, and this would have been echoed in the letter to the new Prime Minister from a number of companies that we saw come out, I think that was just last week or 2 weeks ago, that industry values the system that we have here in Alberta. They would love to see Alberta continue to manage this, as it is so closely linked with our energy production. We've taken a common sense approach. They're very appreciative and not surprised at all. There's likely more coming, more changes to tier based on the feedback we've been gathering. For now, this is a price freeze, but I think that there is very much a real opportunity to ensure that this is still a destination for those capital dollars to come, where we can continue to be not only that energy producer, but leader in innovation and technology as well. And so more to come on that in the coming months. But for now, what was unequivocal is that a carbon price too high will just drive away investment and hurt our economy at the worst possible time.
Thanks. And to follow up, I think what we've been seeing is that the Alberta carbon credits are right now trading at around, $40 per ton, a little bit less even. Can you talk a little bit about why the freeze was necessary when the carbon credits are already so cheap and trading so far below where the current carbon price is?
Again, this is complex in terms of there's also a formula that indicates how many credits and versus how much of a financial obligation companies can use to meet their obligations within the tier system. The complexity is one of the things that we are definitely going to be looking at addressing in the coming months here. But again, the concern was about this escalating carbon price. For the last number of years, I would say we have heard growing concern around the increase to 170. As Premier mentioned, even the federal government themselves were striking contracts for difference agreements at 86.50, and so I think somewhere there, the federal government must have known that a carbon price of $170 isn't good for anybody, and so we will continue to maintain our competitiveness. But when it comes to the value of carbon credits, again, there are a lot of factors there too, not just the schedule and the allowance of how many credits those companies are able to use, but how many credits are within the system, and that's something that's going to be addressed a little bit more so by future policy changes that we make. We just need a little bit more engagement with industry to make sure we would get that right.
Thanks, Minister. And we just have time for one more question today. We're going to come back to the room here. We'll go to Emmanuel.
Yeah, you said you reached out to pathways to industry. Did you reach out to people who are worried you're not going to meet your emissions target and felt that this industrial carbon tax was a good way for Alberta to meet its emissions target?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I reached out to a number of folks last week and the week before, and largely people were supportive. I had one proponent say that they would really like to see potentially a carbon price of somewhere from 105 to 110. And again, my response is this: we can't make the entirety of industry uncompetitive to save one specific project. But then again, I think obviously there are some changes we can make to tier to ensure economics and support for industry on both sides of that equation. Again, we are leaders in emissions reduction. We are proud of our environmental record. Countries around the world see us as that as well. And so instead of punishing our industry, we want to allow them to grow, thrive, continue to increase production, and reduce global emissions all at the same time. We can do that. That's what we're committed to, and we sure hope that Ottawa feels the same way.
There was also a way to fund projects and to fund R&D for all these new technologies you mentioned, carbon capture, air capture, whatever. So there will be less money in the pot now that it's not increasing. How do you expect that Alberta will get these new technologies going that can make industry meet their emissions?
Even over the last couple of years, we have streamlined the investments that we're making in tier to make sure that they are also focused on some of our bigger environmental challenges. Again, the amount of money in the tier fund has also fluctuated based on whether or not companies choose to meet their obligations through credits or through paying those obligations. And so that fluctuates greatly. We've certainly felt that at the Treasury Board table, explaining how these fluctuations take place and why they fluctuate so much from one budget year to the next. And so there was already some fluctuation within that, I call it the bucket of money that we call tier, and then use that to reinvest into technology and innovation. In fact, this year we've been able to even increase some of our investments and the calls for proposals that we've been making in partnership with Emissions Reduction Alberta because there were extra dollars in the fund. And so I think some of that fluctuation is normal. Again, the most important piece has to be economic competitiveness for our industry.
Perfect. And that's all the time we have for questions today.
Everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.